Today we're going to look at how the first emperor Qin Shi Huang's action to eradicate any inner threat to his empire and how it partially led to its downfall. The dynasty that we'll be looking at is the Qin dynasty. The period is around 250 BC to 210 BC. The key players in this story are Yin Yiren, Qin Shi Huang's father, Lü Buwei, Yin Yiren's benefactor and assistant, Zhao Ji, who was the mother of Qin Shi Huang, and of course Qin Shi Huang himself. Firstly, we look at the historical context. Chinese history became relatively reliable around 1046 BC when the Zhou dynasty was established. The Zhou regime followed the feudal system when the Zhou king granted his relatives and key collaborators of his kingdom lordship over the lands in what is now northern China along the Yellow River. Even though there were independent jurisdictions, they remained subordinated to the Zhou king until around 770 BC, when the central government began to lose its prestige and military might. China entered into a tumultuous era, which was roughly split between the spring and autumn era, 春秋时期, from 770 to 476 BC, and the warring period, 战国时期, from 476 BC to 221 BC. China was united under the leadership of the first emperor Qin Shi Huang, and the empire was named after his original kingdom, Qin. It was the first time in Chinese history where this large landmass in East Asia was governed by a centralized government with a functioning bureaucracy rather than a regime comprised of semi-independent vassal states. The Qin Empire originated from the Qin vassal state, which was conferred to Qin Shi Huang's ancestor with the last name Ying. The Qin state was situated in the west in what is now Shanxi province. This area is known as the land where the dragon rises, 龙兴之地, as the Zhou Empire also emerged from it around 1000 BC. Subsequent to Qin, the mighty empires of Han, Sui, and Tang dynasties also counted their roots to this land known as Guanzhong, as in inside the barricade, inside the wall, meaning the land within the fortress. Enveloped by mountains, Guanzhong was a fertile terrain that faced the prosperous lands of the east along the Yellow River. However, the status of a vassal state was driven by and large by the original lord's relationship with the Zhou king. For example, the first great power of the spring and autumn period was Qi, whose lords were the descendants of Jiang Ziya, brains behind the unification of then China under Zhou. The Qin ancestor, however, was responsible only for raising horses for the Zhou king. The Qin state was given a proper vassal title, as its leader at the time helped the Zhou king to settle to the eastern capital of Luoyang after the western Zhou fell in 738 BC. In the 600s BC, Qin produced a famous and powerful Qin Mugong. It was nonetheless still considered a western savage by the prosperous eastern states. One of the reasons being there were hundreds who were buried alive to keep him company after his death. Such practices were considered barbaric by the mainstream Chinese culture already at the time, though it will be revived later in, say, the Ming Dynasty in around 1400 AD. Vassal states continued to consolidate since the spring and autumn period, and by the time Shangyang entered the scene, China was dominated by 7 powers. They were Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin. The real rise of the Qin happened during the early part of the warring period in 350s BC under the reform of the great minister Shangyang. Shangyang's reform mainly comprised of focusing the vassal state's resources on agriculture and war, with the former's purpose being to provide for the latter. Shang created strong incentive structures for fighting courageously in the battlefield. For example, up to this present day, the Chinese word for the head is 首级, which is translated to head rank. The source came from Shangyang's reform, A Qin citizen was divided by rank, and one of the ways to get ahead is to come back from battle with heads of the enemy soldiers. A head counted for a rise in rank, and therefore the character is included in the Chinese term. Such incentive structures created a fierce Qin army, as the other warring states came to fear them and referred to them as the army of wolves and tigers, the arbitrage trade of Lü Buwei. With the Qin state being the supreme dominant power amongst the warring states, entered the main character of our story, the businessman Lü Buwei. The story happened around 250 BC, about 30 years before the Qin state unified China. Lü Buwei was originally from the small feudal state of Wei and moved to the powerful feudal state of Zhao to run his trading business. He was said to have become extremely wealthy through his trade and had a net worth of 1,000 gold. However, he had something bigger in mind and was demonstrated through his conversation with his father. Lü Buwei said to his father, "What is the capital return for agriculture?" The father replied, 10 times. And Lü Buwei asked again, "How about the capital return for trading?" Lü's father said, 100 times. Lü Buwei then asked the final question. "So how about the capital return for making a person to the throne and lord over all the lands under heaven," referring to all of China? Lü Buwei's father replied, "Infinity. However, be mindful you will perish if you are not careful." Ignoring his father's words of warning, Lü Buwei proceeded with his plan to enter into politics. The motivation of Lü Buwei for the career change had more to do with a simple calculation of the capital rates of return. The social status of a businessman was extremely low in ancient China, regardless of the amount of wealth he possessed, as power has always been the only stable source of resource acquisition. Many merchants had their wealth confiscated because they had been on the wrong side of the political wind.